Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our little mini series on how to take better video and photos with your smartphone. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the manual adjustments that you can make on your screen just before you take the photo or press record on the video. You know, there's a whole lot of things that you can do to improve the quality of the photograph or the video that you shoot. And I've noticed that a lot of people don't take advantage of these adjustments that you can make. And so today we're going to take a look at all of those different things that you can make slight adjustments to that are going to improve the quality of your shot or your video. Let's get going. Okay, here we are inside my camera app. This is an iPhone 15 Pro Max. All right, the first thing we might notice are the vertical and horizontal lines that are on our screen. We talked about this in our last lesson. This is having the grid on, and it is to help new photographers learn how to compose their shot in a pleasing way. After you have been filming or taking photos for a while, you can probably shut those off. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and shut mine off right now, and that will help us maybe see things a little clearer as we do this tutorial. Okay, now we see just the one line, and what that is to help you get level. You'll see if I move my tripod a little bit to one side that it shows you how much I'm off being level, and the idea is you want to try and get it so that it turns yellow and then turns off, and then you know that you're level. The next thing that we might notice here is that just by default, it seems a little bit overexposed. Normally, the iPhone does a pretty good job of selecting proper exposure, but sometimes when you're in unique lighting situations, it doesn't always get it right. Especially in a studio situation, the camera just doesn't seem to be programmed to correctly expose in a studio with a lot of lights. And so we need to make some adjustments. Let's maybe talk about how we can change the exposure if it doesn't look quite right when you're setting up your shot. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. If you look over on the left-hand panel, you'll see that there is a few symbols there. One says RAW Max, and then just below that, right in the center, is a little arrow that points to the left. If we tap on that, we see that we open up a whole new range of settings over on the right-hand side. And one of these settings is a circle with a plus and minus in it. If we tap on that, it opens up a ruler scale here that we can slide up and down with our finger, and that will adjust our exposure. And I think that looks a little better at -7. Maybe we can bring it down just a little bit more. Another quick way that we can change our exposure setting is to point to any particular item in your shot that you want to correctly expose and just hold your finger down on that. I'm going to hold my finger down on the face of the man rowing, and you'll see that a little sun pops up. And if you now take your finger and slide up and down on that sun, you can see how you can change the exposure that way as well. And if you hold it down long enough, you'll see that a little symbol shows up at the top where you're going to lock that exposure in. It's not going to make random adjustments on you now. It's not only exposure that it's locking in, it's also the autofocus. You might have noticed earlier it was kind of switching between the man in the canoe and the face on the wall as to what it was trying to focus in on. But now, because we've pressed down on the face of the man in the canoe, that's what we've locked our focus and our exposure on. All right, now let's maybe take a look at how we can zoom in on the people in the canoe. Just by pressing down on the screen, a wheel appears, and as we slide that down, you can see that we can zoom in on it. Now, you might remember how I mentioned in our last lesson that it's actually better if you zoom with your legs. There's a couple reasons why that's better. One of the things that I always worry about is when people zoom in, that they will eventually go past the physical capability of the lens on their camera. and slip into what's called a digital zoom. And you'll notice as we go in closer, we are now in what's called the digital zoom. And everything all of a sudden becomes very pixelated, and it's not something that we can use in a professional way at all. And a lot of times people, instead of moving closer to the subject, will actually use their digital zoom, and the photos they get are just totally unusable. This iPhone has a physical lens that goes all the way to 120, and so I can go up to 5 times zoom and still not be entering the digital zoom. So that's good. But I always worry that people are going to use their zoom on their camera are going to zoom in too much. The other reason why I recommend people get closer rather than use the zoom, and that is when you're taking video especially, the wider that you have the lens, the more steady you'll be able to keep your shot, especially as you're walking around. If you are zoomed in all the way to 5 and you're trying to hand hold a shot, it's going to be very difficult for you to keep it steady because you're just zoomed in so much. So it's better to be zoomed out. Now, I should mention, if you go below 1 times, you're going to kind of get into what's called a fisheye shot. And sometimes that can be effective, but most of the times it just looks like a distorted picture. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's better to walk in. Now, I'm using the zoom because I'm on a tripod, plus this is on a table and I can't move my tripod any closer. Okay, let's turn on our extended menu by tapping on this little arrow. And let's take a look at some of the other features here. One of them is what might be a pseudo-white balance, you might call it. But you'll notice as we go through the settings here, you can watch the wording down below. This is more vivid. This is vivid warm. And you can see it's adjusting the color temperature also as we go through this. But it doesn't really give you a lot of options. One nice feature is you can go completely black and white, monotone. Now you should know that you can also change any video to monotone or black and white like this in the video edit software. So don't feel like you have to do it here. It's probably better to get the full color and then we can decide after the fact whether we want the color information or not. If you film in black and white, there's no way we can add color later. I would say as much as possible, it's best to stay in the original format. We can do the adjustments when we're editing as needed, and we don't have to start with something that looks, like that. Vivid cool. That might be harder to color grade when we're doing the video edit than if you filmed in the original format. All right, let's take a look at the next one down. Looks like a little clock or a timer. Well, this gives you the ability to set a timer. So after you press the little button, you can be included in the group shot that way. Okay, so let's come out of there. 16:9, what does that mean? The iPhone gives you the option to take your photographs square for Instagram, I guess that's for, or 4:3, which is the old TV standard format, or just the way some people like photographs, I guess, or 16:9. I like to have it in the 16:9 aspect ratio because the photographs that I take that way, I can easily drop into a video timeline when I'm editing, and I don't have to make any adjustments. So this is where we can turn live on or off or put it on auto. And live is a format for taking photos that will actually take almost a second of photos. So when you tap on the button, it takes, maybe 30 frames. And then after the fact, you can choose which frame you like the best. It will pick one for you that the computer thinks is the best and present that to you. But you have the ability to go in and select a different one that maybe somebody's eyes aren't closed. And so that's kind of a nice feature, and you can choose to have that on or off or on auto. Whether we have it off or on here, notice that you also can change that just before you take the shot by the little button up in the top corner. Right now, because it's yellow, it's telling me that it is on, but I can just tap that once and now it's off, and tap it on again and it's on. So you don't necessarily have to go into this extended menu to turn that on or off. Okay, the next symbol there has to do with shooting at night. This is actually a great little feature that you can use to enhance your night shots, especially the shots of the night sky. If you want to bring out the stars brighter, or for example, my wife and I used this mode the other night when we were out watching the northern lights. By turning this on, we were actually able to capture more than what we could see with the naked eye. It really brought out the colors. And so it made for a very interesting shot. My wife just loved sharing this to her friends on Facebook. Now, you will want to have your camera on a tripod for these kinds of shots, but I really encourage you to give it a try. Put your camera on a tripod some night and see what you can capture in the evening sky. Okay, the next symbol there has to do with whether or not you want the flash to be on all the time, on auto, or flash off. Professional photographers will always ask you to turn that off because it can really ruin the shot. It's better to bring your subject out into the light or provide some other type of external light that has kind of a soft box on it so that it doesn't cause harsh shadows in the face and strange lighting in the eyes and around the eyes with wrinkles. It's just flash can really make your photo look bad. All right, let's shut that extended menu off and take a look at the various photo options and video options that we can use. The first one is a time lapse, and you may have noticed that as we slide through these, the exposure setting that we chose and the focus lock that we chose kind of got lost. It's not remembering it as we, say, move to time lapse. So we would have to go in and adjust the exposure again, I think, if we were going to do a time lapse here. Although since this is a still life, it probably wouldn't make much sense to do a time lapse. I'm sure everybody knows what a time lapse is. You can capture a lot of activity in a few seconds and show it as a kind of a fast motion shot, a time lapse shot. So those shots you see where the clouds are moving really fast, well, that's a time lapse. If you want to take something in slow motion, the iPhone has that set up for you. Now, when you choose the slow-mo mode, you've probably experimented with this. You know what it does. When you hit the record button, it records it at a higher frame rate so that when you play it back, everything is slowed down. And once you have selected the slow-mo mode, take a look up in the left-hand corner. You'll see some numbers, and you'll see that it has switched to HD. We had turned it on to 4K so that all of the video that we would shoot would be in 4K. But when you turn on slow-mo, it switches it to HD. So you'll only be able to take your slow motion videos in high definition in HD. You won't be able to do that in 4K, at least at the moment. But notice how I can tap on the 120 and change that to 240. That changed our exposure, so we'd have to make adjustments on that before we hit record. But that shows you have the option between 240 and 120. And what's the difference? If you set it to 240, the motion is even going to be slower, really slow. Now, something I might point out here is that even though you film in slow motion, when you bring that clip into the editing software on your computer and you go to play it, it might not look like it's playing back in slow motion. And you might be wondering, well, what happened? I was sure that I shot that in slow motion. Well, just know that when you play it on your edit software, the editing software is going to try its best to make it look like it's been filmed in real time, not slow motion. So it will make the adjustments in the background to make your slow motion clip look like normal speed. What you have to do is make the adjustments in your edit software to get the actual slow motion. But by recording at 120 or 240 frames a second, it's going to give you a lot smoother slow motion when you do make that adjustment in your editing software. So that's slow-mo. Let's go to cinematic. Let's see, what is cinematic all about? You'll notice that the camera has gone to the face on the wall again, and everything is in focus on that face and things in the background. Well, let's tap on the man in the canoe again, and by holding it down for a second, it locks in on that face, and it's not going to now go back to the other face. It's trying to, but we have locked in the man in the canoe. So what is cinematic all about? What does cinematic give us? Well, you may have noticed that now everything in the background is kind of out of focus. And this is a nice effect when you're taking photographs or taking video. It draws your eyes' attention to the person or thing that you want to focus in on and highlight. And let's maybe zoom in. Let's hit the little 2 here. You see it's at 1 times right now. When you're in the cinematic mode, you don't have as many options to zoom in, but we can go in with by hitting the 2. And that even accentuates the blurriness of the background, the out of focus background, by being in close like that. And so that's what cinematic is. Now, you're not locked into that much blurriness. If you want to bring back some of the background focus, let's hit our expanded menu again by tapping on the little arrow. And you'll see a little F there. Tap on that, and that opens up a slider that you can adjust the actual f-stop of your lenses so that you can bring the background a little more in focus. And you can decide just how much blur you want to add by making your adjustments there. All right, let's move to video. What's the difference between cinematic and video? Well, now you'll notice that almost everything is in focus. Again, it's jumped to the face on the wall. Let's go back to locking in the man in the canoe. And let's maybe zoom in a little bit. You'll notice that now the background is not as out of focus as it was when we were in the cinematic mode. So when would you want to choose that? Well, it could be that you are filming a group of people, or maybe a football game or some kind of sports where you want a very wide depth of field. You want people in the foreground to be in focus, and you want the people way on the back to be in focus. Well, that's when you would use the video mode rather than the cinematic mode, so that more things will be in focus at the same time. Now, something that we should point out, if you could take a look at the left-hand menu options, let's go through these. You'll see that it shows the number 24, and if you saw our last video lesson where we were changing the settings in the menu system of the phone, we chose a setting of 4K at 24 frames per second. And so that's what's showing up here by default. However, you're not stuck with that. And if you need to change it, you don't have to open up the camera settings. You can just tap on that 24 and change it to 30 right on the spot, or even probably 60. Let's see. Yeah. So why would we ever want to change it to 60? Well, I always prefer to shoot at 24 frames per second. It's a little bit more pleasing. It's a more film-like, more cinematic, we might say. However, occasionally, as you're filming, you might say, oh, I bet you that would look good in slow motion. Well, you can switch it to 60, and by changing it to 60, it will give the video editor the ability to make a much smoother slow motion than if you just had it set to 24. And also, in the same way, you can quickly change it from 4K to HD. But as much as possible, we like to keep it on 4K. That gives us a lot more flexibility for making the shot more steady and recomposing the shot after the fact. And so as much as possible, I recommend you filming in 4K. Now, the next little symbol, you see a man running and a line across the circle. You might be wondering, what on earth is that? This is for when you're walking around and filming at the same time as you're walking. You know what will happen when you do that. As you walk, you're going to kind of be moving the camera as you walk, and it's going to look a little shaky. Well, if you tap on here just before you get a shot like that, a couple things happen. It changes to 2.8K instead of the 4K, and you'll notice that it switched to the widest possible lens. Remember earlier I was telling you the wider your lens, the more steady it's going to be. I think we could probably go in a bit and still be okay, but the idea is most of the unsteadiness is going to appear at the edges of your video. But by cropping in on the sensor this way, you'll minimize the amount of shake. It's kind of an in-camera stabilization method that they have come up with. Okay, we know what the little arrow does. ProRes log. You might remember from our last video that when we were changing the camera settings, we turned on ProRes as an option for filming video in a much higher quality video codec. And so I like to have that on because there will be times when I'm filming and I see something that is absolutely amazing and I know that I want to get the highest possible quality. Well, all I have to do is turn this on by tapping on it. And now I'm filming in ProRes, which is a high quality video codec, by Apple, and I'm also filming in what's called the log format. Now, when you look at this screen, you might say, oh, I really don't like that. Why would I ever want my video to look like this? Well, in the end, it's not going to look like this. This is just what log video looks like, whether you're filming on an iPhone or a $80,000 high-end video camera. This is just what log video looks like. But shooting in the log format like this just gives you more options when you do your color grading when you're editing the video. You might notice the little message up at the top of the screen warning you that if you do film at this high quality codec, that you only have a maximum amount of time of 20 minutes of video before you've filled up your hard drive. So take a look at that. If you decide to film in ProRes, just notice how much time is left on your hard drive. Okay, let's shut that off. I don't use that very often, but it's nice to know that it's there. All right, let's switch to photo. Fix the exposure just a little bit. I think it needs to be a little darker. One thing I might say about this, adjusting the exposure when you're taking photos, is you can run into a problem where when you're filming outside in the bright sunlight, the screen of your iPhone is going to try and compensate and make some adjustments so that you're able to see the screen better. So if you're making adjustments to your exposure at the same time, you can get tricked. And what you think is going to be a proper exposure in the end is going to be too dark. Once you start experimenting with this, especially when you're taking photographs outdoors, you'll know what I mean. Some of the photographs that you take after you've made your adjustment are just going to be too dark. You'll wish you would have not brought it down quite so low. Now, there's a way that you can work with that, and that is over on the left-hand panel. You see that because of the camera settings that we set up in our last lesson, we have the ability to choose whether or not to take our photos in the RAW format. And if I have that turned on, and I am too dark when I take my photographs, that won't be any problem because the photograph, the image, is being saved in a way that it's saving all of the information for all of the possible exposures. And so it'll be a lot easier to photo correct this in photo editing software after the fact if you have saved your photos in RAW. You see that we have the live setting option here showing up. We can turn it on or off. The next option here, it looks like our timer is turned on from what we were doing before. Let's tap on that and see, okay, the option turns on over on the right-hand side where we can turn that off. And now it disappears. And we know what the little arrow does. We know that this is showing us that we are one stop underexposed. To compensate for the bright lights in our studio, there is the nighttime setting, and then we know that our flash is off. And we like our flash to be off. All right, so our next option is portrait. Portrait is a photo mode, and this is a lot like the video mode that we were looking at earlier, the cinematic mode, where it puts the person or the object that you want to feature in focus and everything else in the background out of focus. You'll notice over in the top left-hand corner, we've switched to an f-stop of 2.0 again, and you'll see that everything in the background is nicely blurred out. This is a nice feature when you're taking photographs of one individual, especially. It really features that one person. Where you might not want to use it is if you're taking group shots, especially if you've got so many people that you have two rows of people. What's going to happen is that the people in the front row are going to be in focus. The people in the back row won't be. You can kind of see that the people in the back are out of focus here. So if you're just taking a photograph of one person, this can really add a beautiful effect, and it's worth experimenting with. One last setting here is the pano, and if you don't know what that is, that's fun to try out. You can take panorama shots where you can almost do a full 360 turnaround and get a lot more in your shot than what your camera would normally take. All right, well, I think that is everything that I wanted to show you today about the various options that you can select just before you go to take a photograph. Really improve the look and feel of your photos and videos. I know that this is a lot to take in one lesson. There's a lot of things to know and understand and remember. You might need to watch the video a couple times with your phone in your hand, just kind of following along, doing all of the same things on your iPhone as we go through it. Even then, when you get out into the field that you're taking photographs, you might still wonder, what do I need to do? And you might be in a panic. But the more that you do it, the more it'll become second nature, and you'll just almost do it without thinking. So keep at it, don't give up, and you too can have better photos and videos with your iPhone. We'll see you next time.